Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, dogs and cats, and all the fish at sea. It is I, your humble, grumbly, mumbly guide to all the tabletop role-playing game news, weather, and general internet nonsense that is the OGGM. And it is another foggy, rainy, crappy day here at Ventura, California, where it's supposed to be spring. I have a headache because weather hates me, and I'm drinking water. Support me, water. I will sell out. It's Monday, which means it's time to take a look at all the tabletop role-playing game news stories that we can chart the week by. And as we've been doing for the past couple of weeks, we're going to separate this. We're going to provide it in smaller little chunks instead of me trying to shove all the news down your throat at once. Hashtag shove it all down your throat at once. By first taking a look at all the tabletop role-playing game stories that have nothing to do with Wizards of the Coast. And then in a separate vlog, we will look at Wizards of the Coast this week. But first, let's take a look at Renegade Game Studios. Dun, 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 dun. Home, amongst other things, of the Power Rangers role-playing game. Renegade has announced that they will be at Gen Con. They've been at Gen Con before, but this is the first time they've ever really been able to be excited about it because Power Rangers, Transformers, G.I. Joe, and wait for it. So if you're going to Gen Con this year, which is June, and want to check out what's new with the Renegade Studios, you can, because they'll be there, and you can get a code, and you can use this code to get free stuff for them there. They're also going to be doing their own Summer Special Edition convention on June 9th, right before Gen Con, where they will just be doing the usual kind of stuff. This will be on their YouTube channel. It'll reveal all the new products they're going to have coming out. Maybe TJ will be on it since he's working on Power Rangers and didn't tell me. I'm not bitter, TJ, but we're working on Power Rangers and you didn't tell me. And then speaking of Hasbro and Power Rangers and other licenses that Hasbro owns, ponies! That's right. Everypony. If you are a child or a child at heart or have spent the last 14 years working with children, you will recognize these individuals because My Little Pony Friendship is Magic is now going to be available both as a deck building game and a role-playing game from Renegade Press, because Renegade Press is the official home of all the Hasbro properties that Hasbro doesn't want Wizards of the Coast to ruin. So Renegade Press has brought us the Transformers role-playing game, the Power Rangers role-playing game, the G.I. Joe role-playing game, and everybody was like, well, where are the rest? And they were like, wait for it, because summer's coming up, and we got to have a big release for summer, and it's My Little Pony. My Little Pony, friendship is magic. Don't worry, Everypony. It is I, Sparkle Parkle Pony. Oh, yeah. Okay. Yes. I have a 6-year-old niece, and I've worked in special needs children for years, so I'm very familiar with the ponies. So, yes, and we knew they were going to do this, and this will be, I guess, pretty huge for them since My Little Pony makes Hasbro more money than it does D&D. I guess next is Peppa, unless they make Peppa an expansion for My Little Pony role-playing game, because Peppa is Hasbro's #1 seller. So yeah, will we see a Peppa the Pig role-playing game? Are we excited about My Little Pony? I'm sure there are a lot of people out there that are. I know for those of you who are a little bit more aware of the tabletop role-playing game world, you might be going, but wait, there was already a My Little Pony role-playing game. Actually, no, wait, there was actually there was 3 My Little Pony role-playing games before this one. Well, those apparently, according to Hasbro's weird way of looking at math and time and history, never happened. This is the first official My Little Pony Friendship is Magic role-playing game. You can pre-order it now, and it'll be available soon. G.I. Joe Mission Critical is a card-based G.I. Joe themed game that they're coming out with. And to introduce the game, it's going to have Get Off Your Feet, Maggots! Sergeant Slaughter, champion of America and Afghanistan and Saturday morning cartoons. Yep, if you're familiar with wrestling in the 80s, you're probably familiar with who Sergeant Slaughter is. Well, he's going to be the figurehead for the G.I. Joe Mission Critical game, as well as he's going to have his own limited edition accessory pack for the G.I. Joe role-playing game. So if you've been scratching your head waiting to introduce the Sarge into your G.I. Joe role-playing game, at ease, maggots, now you can. In addition, Renegade Press also brings us Heroes of the Grid. This is our Power Rangers Allies pack for the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers role-playing game that was worked on by my friend TJ Storm, who never told me he was working on it, but I'm not bitter. Includes several new characters and allies from the Heroes of the Grid storyline, which you might not be familiar with if you just know of the show. But Heroes of the Grid was a huge, huge part of the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers cartoons. I mean, not cartoon, comic book series. So here are some characters that appeared in the Heroes of the Grid for the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers setting. We also have some bad guys for the setting and some side characters like Beast Morpher Gold and Beast Morpher Silver. We have some information on Venjix. If you were a fan of the series, then Beast Morphers Season 2 was pretty cool, especially the way it gave shout-outs to previous issues of the series. In fact, I would say Beast Morphers Series 2 was a better nostalgia tip of the hat to the Power Rangers history than the 50-minute movie. But that's just me. And you can start pre-ordering for the Power Rangers' next adventure for the Power Rangers role-playing game, Across the Stars. This will be dealing with all the space-based Power Rangers like SPD and stuff like that. And the Psycho Rangers. Who remembers the Psycho Rangers? I remember the Psycho Rangers. Plus, we have some figures that they're coming out with for all their various games. These will be this little standee figures, the little cardboard ones that slide in the thing, as opposed to the actual huge, thick figures. They're slightly cheaper and they're easier to carry. So that's everything that's going on with Mighty Morphin Power Rangers and Renegade Studios. Moving on to Modiphius. What's going on with Modiphius? As you know, they've been doing this recordings of their new world Dreams and Machines. This is the first completely independent role-playing game thing that Modiphius has ever made. It has nothing to do with Fallout or Dune or Star Trek or any of the other IPs they had. This is theirs. It is a post-apocalypse mechanical world where there's robots and people trying to rebuild, but it's trying to be post-apocalypse with a sunny disposition, thus the flowers, as opposed to the usual doom and gloom that's associated with post-apocalypse. And so they've been doing live plays and podcasts of this, and the second one is available if you want to listen to it. It's over on the Modiphius Twitch page. Modiphius is entering on some new stuff for the Fallout role-playing game. We have the astoundingly awesome tales for the Fallout role-playing game. These are a series of adventures that are done in the theme of the old comic books, Astounding Adventures and stuff like that. The anthology collection comic books that would have like 2 or 3 different horror stories or sci-fi stories in them, like Amazing Adventures, creepy, stuff like that. And this is a series of small adventures done in that style for Fallout. Modiphius is also releasing some new stuff for Achtung Cthulhu, their tabletop role-playing take on the world of Cthulhu, this time Cthulhu in World War II. They also have something called Not the End. It's a diceless role-playing game from Mana Project Studios that tells the adventures of heroes willing to risk everything for what they hold dear, i.e. a normal fantasy/sci-fi campaign where you have several characters that are bound together. But this one's diceless and storytelling because we know how well those do. And that's what's up with Modiphius. Is there anything else going on in the world of tabletop role-playing games that has nothing to do with Wizards of the Coast? Absolutely nothing to do with Wizards of the Coast. We have a few. Let's take a look at those before we bring this to an end. Hey, starting off with the Open RPG, the never-ending story that is the ORC. Last week, Paizo released the second and possibly final version of the ORC. That's available for you to look at their site and on their Discord. They have both the actual complete Open RPG content license, which doesn't spell ORC, it spells ORCL, as well as the shorter question and answers, and at the end of which there's still a lot of questions and very few answers. And they've invented a whole new term for role-playing: viral publishing and viral role-playing, and upstream viral role-playing and downstream viral role-playing. So in order to make this even more confusing than it already was, Paizo and their attorneys added a whole new word to the lexicon of our hobby that didn't exist before. So, yay! Anyways, this is going to the lawyers. It's going through the final thing, and then it's heading on over to the Library of Congress. So we will be able to start protecting our product under the ORC very soon, which, for the way it reads now, might not be that good of a thing. Or it could be. I don't know. We'll see. It's a story that needs to come to an end. Speaking of stories that need to come to an end, do we have anything else going on? Oh, yes. I think we talked about this before. We have a game coming out called When the Wolf Comes. It's a Viking-verse role-playing game brought to you by the people who brought us Shadow of the Demon Lord. Shadow of the Demon Lord, while you might not be aware of it, in the great big coffle of tabletop role-playing games that are out there for your attention, it has definitely been one of those tertiary role-playing games that, despite never seeing really a lot of public acknowledgement, is apparently huge and considered very, 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 very well by a lot of people in the know. It's definitely the one of those little engine that could nominees. It's apparently an amazing system. It just doesn't get the press it should. But anyways, these guys have jumped on the Viking bandwagon and made a modern day Viking horror adventure, fantasy adventure set using the rule set for Shadows of the Demon Lord. So you can play descendants of Vikings in a Viking-based modern-day world where the history of the world has been changed because Vikings succeeded and took over the world. And now we have America as if Vikings had, conquered it and everything. I don't know how that works, but it's all history. So just whatever, imagine history as it is today, but instead of, Spanish conquistadors and British explorers, we have Vikings. Yay. Vikings were huge last year and the year before. If you go to any cable channel of your choice, streaming service, Netflix, Amazon, whatever, and enter the word Viking, you will see at least a dozen Viking-themed movies that have come out over the last 2 or 3 years. Why? Why Vikings? I don't know. I guess they're more acceptable than, say, Game of Thrones style game movies, where everybody was trying to jump on the Game of Thrones, Lord of the Rings, Witcher engine for the past 2 or 3 years. Somebody went, Vikings are a little closer to home, we can make them a little bit more believable. People know what Vikings are. Well, most people know it. 80-90% of the population of the planet have a general idea what Vikings are. So we can bring people into the fold by going Vikings and then adding the other fantastic stuff that never really happened. But hey, Vikings. So yeah, and maybe it's a little too late, but now we have a Viking-themed role-playing game. I don't know. Crucible 7 has announced the new edition of their Victoriana role-playing game. A couple of different individuals have had control over this license over the years, including Artisolian, but now Crucible 7 has it. They're re-releasing it under their new C7D20 system, their result of the January OGL disasters. They are now releasing their own system called C7020. We have yet to hear anything about C7020 other than it uses 7020. It's in the name, so you need at least 7 20-sided dice to play this game. Victoriana is kind of important in the history of the hobby, as it was one of the very first, if not the first, tabletop role-playing game that embraced the steampunk movement of the late 90s, early 2000s. So Eberron, Battle Chasers, all that stuff, the very beginnings of the steampunk movement. This is one of the very first role-playing games that embraced it. It was available through Artisolian, I believe, and a couple other publishers, and then it disappeared, and now it's back. And speaking of things that never go away, Modifius has released, Free League is releasing some new stuff for the Alien role-playing game. And Steve Jackson is releasing another expansion to Munchkin called Munchkin Batman. All the cards are just going to say, I win because I'm Batman. I win because I'm Batman. I win because I'm Batman. If you didn't know it, Steve Jackson Games is privately owned, which means they don't have to release any information on their public shareholders other than maybe an annual yearly update. And the annual yearly update to their shareholders, of which they have none, they announced that they're making yet another version of Munchkin, as well as several new Kickstarters and other stuff for things that have nothing to do with GURPS. And as we said before when we were talking about Steve Jackson last week, now would be a good time to try and push GURPS, considering the political nature of the world. I think the world is ready for another GURPS cyberpunk, GURPS conspiracy, GURPS Warehouse 13. And maybe if you do GURPS cyberpunk, can get rated by the Pinkertons, which will just increase your press even more. Because we all remember when GURPS kicked D&D to the curb in the early 90s. I don't know about you, but I know in my corner of the world, everybody gave up everything they were running and switched over to GURPS. Every fantasy game switched over to GURPS. Every superhero game switched over to GURPS. Every space game, horror game, whatever. There was about a 2-3 year gap there from like 85 through 92 where everything was GURPS for as far as you could see. And then as quickly as it gained popularity, kind of faded away. And Steve Jackson Games has never really been that big. But their consistent moneymaker has been Munchkin. And they're releasing more Munchkin because it makes them money. But I don't know about anybody else. I'd like to see them take some of that creative energy and maybe put it back into GURPS, because maybe now's the right time. Or not. I don't know. I think it is, but what I think doesn't matter. What do you think? Let me know what you're thinking today. It's Monday. It's 9 o'clock in the morning. It is cold and rainy. And that is all the tabletop role-playing game news. It has nothing to do with Wizards of the Coast. Now let's take a breath and then switch on over to the Wizards of the Coast news. I'll be back shortly. Till then, stay safe. And remember, subscribe and buy my merch. Damn marks. GURPS Supers. I wrote it.